Welcome to our Safe Sanctuaries training, where we will discuss policies and procedures to protect our children, youth, and vulnerable adults. After this video, there will be a short quiz to build on the important content of this training. Please remain engaged throughout the entire video. We recognize that our faith calls us to offer hospitality and protection to all children, youth, and vulnerable adults, as well as to those who are committed to ministering to them as volunteers and employees. Every 15 seconds, a child is abused or neglected. Often, abuse occurs in places where children and youth feel safe, such as homes, schools, camps, and yes, churches. In over 3/4 of reported cases, the victim was related to or acquainted with the abuser. In light of this, Noblesville First has seen fit to outline policies and procedures that can prevent such abuse from happening within our church, be a place where children feel safe in disclosing abuse, protect the loyal volunteers and employees who minister to our children, youth, and vulnerable adults, as well as allow those known sexual offenders who choose to worship at Noblesville First to do so in a manner that protects our children, youth, and vulnerable adults, while at the same time protects the safety, integrates those known sexual offenders into our congregation. Building on the Safe Sanctuary policies established by the Indiana Conference of United Methodist Church, Noblesville First United Methodist Church has incorporated within its Safe Sanctuaries policies additional measures to further protect children, youth, and vulnerable adults, and those known sexual offenders worshiping as a part of our congregation. This policy sets forth the requirements in the areas of 1. Screening, 2. Supervision, 3. Reporting, 4. Response plan, and 5. Protects the integration of known sexual offenders. Now we're going to go over a few definitions. Abuse. Harm or threat of physical or emotional harm to a child or vulnerable adult by a parent, guardian, or another person. Abuse includes the infliction of physical or emotional injury by other than accidental means, the creation of a risk or allowing the creation of a risk to a child by other than accidental means, committing or allowing to be committed an act of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or prostitution upon the child. For purposes of this policy and guideline, child and youth abuse includes all of the following. Physical abuse. Violent, non-accidental contact that results in injury. This includes, but is not limited to, striking, biting, or shaking. Injuries include bruising, abrasions, internal injuries, fractures, cuts, and burns. Sexual abuse. Any form of sexual activity with a child, youth, or a vulnerable adult, whether at the church, at home, or in any other setting. The abuser may be an adult, an adolescent, or another minor. Emotional abuse. A pattern of intentional conduct that crushes a child or youth's spirit, attacks his or her self-worth through rejection, threats, terrorizing, isolation, and belittling. Exploitation. Obtaining or using another person's resources, including, but not limited to, funds, assets, appearance, likeness, picture, or property by deception, intimidation, or similar means with the intent to deprive the person of those resources. Sexual abuse includes, but is not necessarily limited to, any contact or interactions in which the parent, guardian, or another person uses or allows, permits, or encourages the use of the child for the purposes of sexual stimulation of the perpetrator or another person. Sexual exploitation includes, but is not limited to, a situation which a parent, guardian, or other person allows, permits, or encourages the child to engage in an act that constitutes prostitution under state law, or a parent, guardian, or another person having custodial control of the supervision of a child, or who is responsible for his or her welfare, allows, permits, or encourages the child to engage in an act of obscene or pornographic photographing, filming, or depicting of a child as provided under state law. The definitions of child, youth, and adult. A child is anyone age 11 or under. A youth is defined by anyone between the ages of 12 and 18 who have not yet completed high school. An adult is defined as anyone 18 years of age or older and who is no longer in high school. Infant is 0 to 17 months. Toddler is 18 to 3 years. Preschool is in preschool. Elementary is kindergarten through 5th grade. Youth is 6th through 12th grade. Vulnerable adult is a person 18 years of age or older who, because of mental or physical dysfunction, is unable to manage his or her own resources, carry out the activity of daily living, or protect him or herself from neglect, exploitation, or a hazardous abusive situation without the assistance of others. A paid staff person is an adult paid by the church and overseen by the Staff Parish Relations Committee and is screened by that committee. An unpaid staff person is an adult not paid by the church who is responsible for a specific ministry area. This person may or may not be overseen by the Staff Parish Relations Committee. A screened adult is an adult who has gone through the Safe Sanctuaries training and screening process, who works with children, youth, or vulnerable adults. A youth supervisor may assist with youth or children activities only if they are at least 5 years older than the oldest child or youth in the ministry setting. The youth helpers may assist with activities, but they will not be considered screened adults. When possible and appropriate, consistent youth helpers will receive CPR and first aid training and Safe Sanctuaries training. Supervisor, one who oversees or directs a ministry or activity. Known sexual offender. A known sexual offender is a person known to the church who has been convicted of a sexual offense against a child, youth, vulnerable adult, or adult who, through the individual's own confession, has admitted to committing a sexual offense against a child, youth, or adult, including but not limited to a person going through the legal process who has not been legally charged or convicted of committing a sexual offense. Leader recruitment and selection guidelines. This section addresses the guidelines based on leadership roles. Except when noted, this applies to all adults serving within ministries related to children, youth, or vulnerable adults. In recruiting and hiring paid and unpaid staff members to work with children, youth, or vulnerable adults in any position of authority, they must be at least 18 years of age or at least 5 years older than the oldest young person they will serve. These standards allow people to be separated enough by years to be recognized as authority figures with the group they are serving. Individuals not meeting these standards may not serve in a role of authority. Noblesville First will not allow anyone to serve in ministries with children, youth, or vulnerable adults until the person has been an active participant and/or member, affiliate member, or associate member of the church for at least 6 months. An active participant is someone considered who attends church at least once a month, is determined active in a discretion by the Family Ministry Operations Team. The 6-month rule extends to 1 year if the person wishing to serve with young people or vulnerable adults is entering any kind of supervisory role. In this case of paid staff, this rule is not often feasible and will be waived on the basis of probation. This time of interaction between ministry leaders and the applicant allows leaders to evaluate the suitability of an applicant for ministry with vulnerable individuals. Paid and unpaid staff applicants must complete and sign an application and the related waivers giving permission to check references and background information. Paid and unpaid staff leaders will request and check 3 references for each applicant. The references will be received electronically or by mail and will be followed up with a phone or face-to-face conversation. Additionally, former supervisors will be contacted for applicants applying for compensated positions. Criminal background checks will be made of all clergy, paid and unpaid staff, as well as laity who have supervisory program responsibilities for children, youth, and vulnerable adults, and other church employees, to the extent permitted by the law before employment, to determine current or historic abuse or sexual misconduct, criminal records, violent or pedophilic behavior. Background checks will cover at least the 5 years before the beginning of this process and every 2 years following. Individuals who have been convicted of physical or sexual abuse or neglect may not work in any church-sponsored ministry, activity, or program for preschoolers, children, youth, or vulnerable adults. All applicants must be interviewed for suitability to the work they desire to do. Interviews will be conducted by the leader of the program in which the applicant will work along with a team of interviewers who understand the needs and requirements of the position. Church policies and guidelines will be discussed during the interview. The church will keep confidential all information received in the applicant selection process. The Director of Family Ministries and their immediate supervisor are responsible for the implementation of these policies, as well as the maintenance of confidential records. Items may be kept with the business manager to ensure security and confidentiality. Before serving in ministries with children, youth, and/or vulnerable adults, all adults will sign an authorization and request for criminal background check, as well as a verification of reading policy statement. All adults in a staff or supervisory role must undergo background checks and child protection safety training that meets or exceeds Safe Sanctuaries standards before working with children, youth, and/or vulnerable adults. Noblesville First will plan and carry out initial trainings on guidelines and procedures for reducing the risk of sexual abuse within church ministry settings, with annual follow-up trainings available. Participation is required for all clergy, paid and unpaid staff. In addition to clergy and paid staff, participation is required by all ministry leaders who supervise ministries and activities with children, youth, and vulnerable adults present. They will be given the general policy and all relevant supplemental materials to review. They are required to sign the verification of reading policy statement. Church employees who supervise children, youth, and/or vulnerable adults must maintain current certification in basic first aid and basic CPR. The church will pay expenses for this training. New employees must get the certification within 90 days of the start of their employment. Nursery workers and others serving infants, toddlers are required to have their training in infant and toddler CPR. CPR training is encouraged for all other adults who supervise children, youth, and vulnerable adults during special activities or events. Outings away from church property will require at least one staff certified in CPR and first aid. All gatherings of children, youth, and vulnerable adults affiliated with Noblesville First United Methodist Church will be governed by the following guidelines. 2 Safe Sanctuaries trained adults who have passed the required background checks will always be present. This applies to all ministries and activities for children, youth, and vulnerable adults on site, away from the church facility, and during transportation. Leaders and teachers will be assigned in teams of at least 2 unrelated, non-cohabitating adults for each Sunday school class of children, youth, or vulnerable adults. Every effort will be made to recruit sufficient numbers of teachers and leaders to support ministries with children, youth, and vulnerable adults. When possible, both male and female leaders would be present. In situations where a second adult cannot be secured for each setting, a rover would be assigned to frequently check in with the classroom. The rover will be trained and screened. Doors will remain open and have a window that lets the rover easily look into the classroom. Noblesville First United Methodist Church will maintain the following ratios in ministries with children, youth, and vulnerable adults. All additional Safe Sanctuaries trained adults will be available as backup supervisors when needed. Appropriate ratios will be maintained. A list of emergency numbers will be accessible to all adults supervising children, youth, and vulnerable adults, and be made available to church staff at all times. These lists will be kept readily available for each ministry event or activity. All parents using the church nursery and childcare services will observe the check-in and check-out procedures. An open door policy will state that parents, guardians of children, youth, and vulnerable served, clergy on staff, and professional staff of the church have the right to visit and observe ministries, activities, classrooms, or church-sponsored programs at any time unannounced. They must maintain discretion. These individuals may not supervise nor be left alone with any children, youth, or vulnerable adults at any time. Youth and vulnerable adults who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual are to use the restroom of their biological gender. Any youth or vulnerable adult who identifies as transgender is able to use the restroom of their preferred gender. If other participants or parents and guardians have an issue with this policy, Noblesville First Family Ministry Operations Team will do its best to reasonably accommodate the participants and parents and guardians to ensure that they feel safe and comfortable. There must be access to a phone when groups are present or away from the church facility. The authorized church representatives will be given a phone number prior to the group's departure from the church property. All classroom and office doors will have a window or visibility from the hallway or remain open when occupied. Windows will be kept free from adornment and kept locked. One-on-one interactions are sometimes necessary and appropriate. Care must be taken so that these interactions are conducted in an environment that provides visibility by other adults while also providing privacy for the child, youth, or vulnerable adult. When possible, individual counseling will take place in an area of the church that contains cameras. Another adult will know staff members' whereabouts and with whom they are meeting. Children, youth, and vulnerable adults receiving individual counseling will be told they are free to discuss any aspect of the counseling process with the parent or other adult, especially if they are uncomfortable about anything that occurs within the counseling setting. All incidents of suspected abuse and neglect revealed during a session would be reported accordingly. Children, youth, and vulnerable adults may need comfort and encouragement. Touching should be initiated only by the child, youth, or vulnerable adult, and the adult response will be within the guidelines of Safe Sanctuaries training. It shall not be based upon the adult's emotional need, but on the present supportive need of the children, youth, and vulnerable adult receiving. A child, youth, or vulnerable adult's preference not to be touched will be respected at all times. Church workers are responsible to protect children under their supervision from inappropriate touching by others. No physical punishment or verbal abuse is to be used at any time. If isolating the child, youth, or vulnerable adult within the classroom or removing the child, youth, or vulnerable adult from the room becomes necessary, the situation will be discussed with the child's parent or legal guardian as soon as possible. Church workers must promptly report inappropriate touching or other questionable behavior by other workers to the appropriate supervisor. No staff, either paid or unpaid, are to give gifts to individual children, youth, or vulnerable adults without the prior knowledge of the parents or responsible clergy. Gift giving can be a form of buying loyalty or silence. Gift giving should be done on a group basis or for special occasions only. Gifts may not be elaborate, but should be modest and appropriate to the occasion. Activities and ministries away from the church and overnight activities. All children and youth participating in out-of-town or overnight outings must have written consent and a medical release form. Consent forms and medical release forms may be filled out and signed digitally or onto a printed document. If the group stays overnight at the church, or if the church-sponsored group leaves the premises, 2 or more leaders must be present and must include at least 1 male and female if the group is of mixed gender. There must be access to a phone when groups are away from the church property. If the outing involves water activities such as swimming, a certified lifeguard will be present with the group. If there will not be a lifeguard during water activities, consent forms must contain a field for youth participants to indicate their swimming level, as well as a notice to the parent and guardian signing that there will not be a lifeguard on duty and that the child, youth, or vulnerable adult is able to swim. Swimming waivers are good for the duration of 1 year. Under no circumstances is one adult other than a parent to take a child or children on an overnight outing alone. Supervision ratios will be followed at all times. Female staff will supervise female youth in their sleeping quarters, and male staff will supervise male youth in their quarters. Married and cohabitating couples will not stay together, but will observe the female-female and male-male sleeping arrangements. Except for a parent or child combination, staff and youth will never occupy the same bed or sleeping bag. If youth who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual are included in an overnight activity, they will stay with their biological gender. If a youth who identifies as transgender is included in an overnight activity, they will stay with their preferred gender. There must be at least 2 unrelated, non-cohabitating adults in each vehicle. Drivers must have a valid driver's license for the type of vehicle being operated, permit a criminal background check, as well as a motor vehicle record search. When a child or youth is transported in a church-owned vehicle, the driver must be at least 21 years of age. All state transportation laws must be followed, and no youth will be responsible for transporting other youth at any time. Community organizations such as Noblesville First United Methodist Preschool, Boy Scouts of America, and Girl Scouts of America each sponsor their own child protection policies. Accordingly, the policies and procedures to those programs shall apply in the place of Safe Sanctuary policies of Noblesville First United Methodist Church. In the event of suspected, reported, or discovered abuse or neglect of a child or minor or vulnerable adult, a representative of the organization shall notify the senior pastor, or in the absence of a senior pastor, another member of the pastoral staff, in addition to following their own program's reporting guidelines and procedures. Other community organizations with their child protection policies will follow the same guidelines. Any community organization that uses our facility without its own child protection policies will be required to follow Noblesville First United Methodist Church's Safe Sanctuaries policy. Abuse response process. As caring Christians, we are committed to protect and advocate for children, youth, and participating in the life of the church. The church is entrusted to provide an emotionally safe, spiritually grounded, healthy environment for children, youth, and vulnerable adults in a nurturing and trusting environment. It is our legal, moral, and Christian responsibility to report suspected abuse whenever it comes to our attention, regardless of where that abuse takes place. We shall report suspected abuse to stop potentially existing abuse and to prevent further abuse from occurring. If abuse occurs, we intend to act as an advocate for all affected persons, providing support, information, assistance, and intervention. We seek to provide a supportive atmosphere, offering both objectivity and empathy as we seek to create a climate in which healing can take place. Please see the Noblesville First Safe Sanctuaries response plan on our website for more details. Be prepared to do the following. Ensure the protection of and tend to the immediate needs of the child as the situation requires. Provide written documentation concerning the incident on designated forms. Do not attempt an investigation. If the accused party is a clergy person on staff at Noblesville First United Methodist Church, the chair of the Staff Parish Relations Committee and the conference superintendent will be notified. The appropriate persons will be notified, the parents of the victim, and take whatever steps necessary to assure the safety of the child or youth until the parent or legal guardian arrives. Proper authorities must be notified even if the parent or legal guardian does not wish for the incident to be reported. The accused shall be relieved temporarily of his or her duties until the investigation is finished. If the accused is a paid staff person of the church, arrangements should be made to either maintain or suspend his or her income until the allegations are cleared or substantiated. Any contact with the media shall be handled by a predetermined spokesperson. Care will be taken to safeguard the policy and confidentiality of all involved. A written report of the basic information shall be kept, ensuring ongoing ministry to and advocacy for victims and others involved. The report shall be brief and contain only factual information relevant to the situation. It shall be locked in a secure place to ensure confidentiality. It shall be written in ink or typed to prevent it from being changed. The church must also file a copy of the report with the bishop's office of the annual conference, where it shall remain confidential. These policies shall be posted at all times on the church website. In addition, these policies shall be available in the church office at all times. Verification of a reading policy statement. Upon receipt of this policy statement, the adult preparing to work with children, youth, or vulnerable adults will read and sign a statement that states he or she has read, understands, and agrees to follow the Noblesville First Safe Sanctuary policies. Additional Safe Sanctuary materials are available on noblesvillefirst.com. Careful screening is one way we can prevent the abuse and exploitation of children, youth, and vulnerable adults. All staff and volunteers who have regular and direct contact with children, youth, and vulnerable adults shall be required to fill out a staff, paid or unpaid, and volunteer background screening and disclosure form that shall include, but is not limited to, standard contact information, experience and qualifications for the position, voluntary disclosure of past criminal history, including any criminal charges and convictions, and any conditions of probation and or parole, waiver of confidentiality, allowing the church to secure background checks and references necessary. General rules to follow. The 2-person rule means there must be at least 2 trained and screened, unrelated, non-cohabitating adults in any classroom or ministry setting. Youth helpers do not count in the 2-person rule. In the event where 2 adults are family members, a 3rd adult must be present at all times. In addition, a rover should periodically check each classroom. Children should be escorted to and from bathroom facilities or when otherwise leaving the room by either one of the screened adults or a designated rover who checks all classrooms. Rovers should check on each classroom unable to abide the 2-person rule frequently and sporadically. Each classroom should be checked about once every 10 minutes, but in a sporadic manner so that their checks cannot be predicted. Rovers should also frequently and sporadically check any closets and bathrooms near the areas that children and youth are participating in their activities. Open door policy. Parents, guardians, volunteers, or staff of the church will be permitted, as reasonableness dictates, to visit and observe all programs and classrooms at any given time. Adults responsible for children who are infants through toddlers will sign in their children and indicate the names of authorized persons to whom the child may be signed out. Adults responsible for children ages 2 through 5th grade will sign their children in and out of Sunday school and other children's activities. Picking up children by unauthorized adults is forbidden. At least 2 screened adults will be present for all non-classroom activities involving children and or youth or vulnerable adults. Meetings held in an individual's home must be pre-approved in writing by the child or youth's parent or guardian and the Director of Ministry area. If the meeting is in the home of the Director of Ministry area, then it must also be pre-approved in writing by the Director's immediate supervisor. The senior pastor will be informed of any meeting held within private homes. In instances where circumstances dictate that confidential conversations would be most effective on a one-on-one basis, an appropriate screened adult may meet individually with youth or vulnerable adults with the knowledge of at least one other paid staff member at any counseling session with children, youth, or vulnerable adults. The door of the room must remain open for the entire session with a second adult near the session but far enough away to provide privacy. If there is a glass in the door or wall that gives a clear view into the room, the door may remain closed. If there is a camera in the room, then the doors may be closed if the counseling session is in clear view of the camera. If another adult is not in the building when the counseling occurs, the session should take place in a room with a camera or be moved to a public place such as a restaurant or outside where other people are present. Following child and youth group events, it is inevitable that occasionally a child's youth transportation arrives after all participants have departed. In those circumstances, a child and youth may unavoidably be supervised by one screened adult under these circumstances only. The general rule requiring the presence of 2 screened adults may be suspended, and the screened adult will call another adult, preferably a parent or guardian, and keep that adult on speakerphone until the child and youth is picked up by a parent. Child to youth adult ratios. Transportation requirements. The driver must be known to the designated adult leader of the event. When a youth or child is transported in any vehicle, the driver must be either the child or youth's parent or guardian, a screened adult, or a paid staff person. When a child or youth is transported in a church-owned vehicle, the driver must be at least 21 years of age, provided, however, an exception is made when the driver is a paid staff person who is at least 18 years of age and for whom a motor vehicle record search has been made, and the record has been found by the appointed clergy and supply pastors to be satisfactory. Drivers must have a valid driver's license for the vehicle being operated. A copy of the driver's license will be on file at the church. Drivers must require the use of seatbelts at all times, and the number of passengers may never exceed the number of seatbelts available. Drivers will be advised of a designated route and will not deviate from it, except in the case of emergency or road detours. Drivers will not use cell phones unless required for communication with other drivers or for GPS applications. Drivers will not text message while driving. No youth will be responsible for transporting other youth at any time. When a trip is planned and the destination is expected to be 100 miles or more from the point of departure, drivers are to be listed on an approved driver's list maintained in the church office. Persons who regularly drive church-owned vehicles are to be listed on an approved driver's list maintained in the church office. To be listed on the approved driver's list, a comprehensive motor vehicle record search must be conducted, and the appointed clergy and supply pastor of his or her designee must determine the record is satisfactory. Drivers will read an acknowledgement form indicating that the child protection policy has been read and will be followed. When possible, the driver should be accompanied by at least one other screened adult. The driver should receive training for the church-owned vehicle being operated. Youth will not drive any other youth at any time. Trip and retreat supervision. Trip and retreat settings may call for different child and youth protection requirements depending on the circumstances. What follows are the requirements and guidelines of our outlined policy. There will be at least 2 screened adults present for all trips, retreats, and other events where children and/or youth or vulnerable adults gather overnight or away from the church campus. There will be at least 1 screened adult for each gender present at co-ed overnight events. At single-gender overnight events, at least one of the 2 screened adults present will be of the same gender as the children and youth. The person in charge of youth and children for each overnight trip and/or retreat will carry paper copies of parental permission slips, including permission for emergency and medical care. Digital copies may also be kept, but preferably as backups. No adult will share a bed with a youth or a child of any gender unless it is their own child. In a hotel-type setting, rooms should be assigned as follows. Separate rooms for adults and children should be assigned with at least 2 children and youth per room. If a student is staying in a room by themselves, parents must provide written consent. Assignments should be made so that an adult room is between every 2 child or youth room. Adults should make random monitoring hall trips and room checks at night by 2 adults of the same gender as those being checked. A hotel should be selected where the rooms open up to the interior of the building. Adults should have their own bathroom and youth should have their own bathroom whenever possible. In settings where there are trained staff present, such as amusement park, fun center, trampoline park, etc., students will be allowed to, if deemed appropriate by the staff leaders, move freely around the property and facility while remaining in a group of 3 or more without the supervision of an adult leader. Students who move freely in a student-only group must check in via text message at least 1 time during the visit. Text messages must include a clear photo that includes all group members, a timestamp or clock indicating that the photo was taken at the time of the check-in and was not taken before. Check in physically with the group leader or leaders at least once during the visit. Check-in times must be assigned by adult leaders in advance and must be clearly communicated to all participants. A quick, compassionate, and unified response to an alleged incident of abuse is expected. All allegations will be taken seriously. In all cases of reported or observed abuse, there shall be cooperation with all official investigating agencies. Reporting is required by any staff or adult ministry servant who personally witnesses an incident of abuse or exploitation. When an allegation of an event or abuse or exploitation is made to a staff or an adult ministry servant by a third party, and or when a child or youth or vulnerable adult discloses abuse or exploitation to staff or to an adult ministry servant, it is crucial that the reporting be immediate and allegations be dealt with as soon as possible to the incident or disclosure. All media requests for statements should be directed to the pastor in charge, who shall be in contact with his or her direct superintendent. Immediately, yet with dignity and respect for the sacred worth of the accused, remove the accused from further involvement with children or vulnerable adults and advise the accused that there has been an allegation of abuse. Details of the allegation of the abuse should not be discussed with the accused at the time of the removal, and any removal of the staff member or volunteer from any activity ministry, care should be taken to handle the removal in a discreet manner, recognizing that there will be an investigation by both state and church authorities, as well as federal and local authorities. When it has been alleged that a member of the church staff or volunteer has committed an act of abuse or exploitation, the staff member or volunteer shall be required to refrain from all ministry activity or events with children, youth, and vulnerable adults until the incident has been fully resolved by the appropriate state, federal, and local authorities and in accordance with the Book of Discipline. Notify all parents and legal guardians of the victim in person, and take whatever steps are necessary to assure the safety and well-being of the child, youth, or vulnerable adult. Take all allegations seriously and reach out to the victim and the victim's family. Remember, the care and safety of the victim is always our first priority. The church should provide a supportive atmosphere to all of those who are affected, offering both objectivity and empathy as it seeks to create a climate in which healing can take place. Keep a written report of the steps taken by the church in response to any reported abuse. The report should be brief and contain only facts relevant to the situation. It should be kept in a secure place. It should be written in ink or typed in order to prevent being changed. The document should be signed and dated by the persons who wrote it upon completion. Please direct any questions about the Safe Sanctuaries policy or procedures to the Director of Family Ministries, the Associate Pastor, or the Lead Pastor. We would love to discuss and answer any questions you have pertaining to the training or the policy of our Safe Sanctuaries.